Formula One on 5 Live.
Formula One is back and we're in Bahrain ahead of the first round of what is set to be a record-breaking season. There are going to be 24 races this year and the first location is the Bahrain International Circuit, and we are poised and ready for the second practice session. We've already had an hour of free practice running. That was FP1 and it was Daniel Ricciardo that topped the timesheets for RB, the newly named team RB, of course formerly AlphaTauri, and it was Daniel Ricciardo ahead of Lando Norris and Oscar Piastri in the McLarens. Is that what we can expect from FP2? I'm not so sure, because FP1 took place in the heat of the day, unrepresentative conditions, and now the sun has set, the lights have come on around this circuit, and I have to tell you, the temperature has dropped. We're all wearing jackets and coats down in the pit lane. Normally a very hot and steamy area, the pit lane, but no, we're all snuggled up in coats waiting for FP2 to start, and I'm standing outside the Red Bull Racing garage because everybody thinks they are the team to beat this season, and they've had a lot of news to deal with coming here to Bahrain. It's all been about their team principal Christian Horner, who I am looking at the moment. He has been the subject of an internal investigation into his behaviour towards a female colleague. Yesterday we heard that he'd been cleared, but this story is still rumbling on. It's Rosanna Tennant with you here in the pit lane. Up in the commentary box we have our lead commentator Harry Benjamin, racing driver and broadcaster Alice Powell, and the BBC's chief F1 writer Andrew Benson. And Andrew, as I stand here looking into the Red Bull garage, I can see Christian Horner talking to some of the mechanics. He was on the pit wall in FP1 and no doubt he's about to take his place on the pit wall for the second practice session. He's smiling now, Andrew, but in the break between FP1 and FP2, some of his other numbers, as it were, across the teams, Toto Wolff, Zach Brown, Laurent Mekies, now the team principal of RB, they've all been talking about what has been going on at Red Bull Racing. What have been the developments? What have been the comments coming from the team principals up and down the paddock about Christian Horner and these allegations that he's been behaving inappropriately towards a female colleague?
So Toto Wolff and Zach Brown, the bosses of Mercedes and McLaren respectively, they've last week they said that they wanted some transparency on this issue, and now they've called for more transparency. They've read the Red Bull statement. As Wolff described it, it's pretty basic. He said, as a sport, we can't afford to leave things in the vague and opaque on critical topics like this. It's going to catch us out. Brown said that the FIA had a responsibility and authority to our sport and fans. They need to make sure that things have been fully transparent with them. I can tell you that I've asked the FIA whether they're going to investigate, whether they're going to ask for a copy of the report. I've just received a reply in the last couple of minutes. They say Red Bull gave assurances in their statement that the investigation was thorough. It is an internal employment matter.
So where does this leave the sport then, Andrew? Because the FIA is the governing body. Formula One, they're not linked. A lot of people think FIA and F1 are the same thing, but they are not linked. So where does this leave Formula One in the interim then? And if we do see an appeal, because of course the complainant who's been part of this investigation, of course, who brought the claims against Christian Horner, has the right to appeal. So where do we stand now?
Well, as Brown put it, there are a lot of unanswered questions about the whole process. We don't know what the investigation entailed. We don't know what they found out. Red Bull is saying it's a private matter and they're not going to give any more details. We know that some allegations have been reported in some countries other than the UK that are more detailed than the allegations that we've been able to publish in the UK. Those allegations were based on the journalist in question claiming to have seen the messages that were involved in this dispute. So one question is, having seen those messages, those messages are obviously out of Red Bull's control. Are they going to appear somewhere at some point? The woman involved, is she going to take this further? If she takes it further, what effect does that have on Formula One? There's a wider corporate issue here. There are sponsors involved. Ford, who are Red Bull's engine manufacturer from 2026, have also called for more transparency from Red Bull. Before the verdict came out, we haven't yet heard from them as to whether they're satisfied, whether this report's been shared with them. That's obviously a question. All of these questions are out there waiting to be answered, and time will tell whether they are and what happens if they aren't.
Yeah, absolutely, the ramifications. Well, Andrew Benson, thank you so much. I know you'll be keeping on top of things as we go further into the season. We are now ready to start FP2. We've got a green light at the end of the pit lane. The cars are heading out, and it is my pleasure to hand over to our lead commentator, Harry Benjamin, up in the commentary box to talk you through this second practice session.
Thanks, Rosanna. Indeed, the sun has set. The floodlights have come on. Over 4,000 illuminating this Bahrain International Circuit, built on the site of a former camel farm in the South Myanmar desert, celebrating 20 years on the F1 calendar. 5.4 kilometres, 15 turns, 9 to the right and 6 to the left. 3 DRS zones, long straights, heavy braking zones, rough and bumpy surfaces to boot. We've had one practice session already earlier in the light of the day, which Daniel Ricciardo in the RB went fastest for. But Alice Powell, who is alongside me, now we're into the night. Tell us why this session is going to give us more of a representative read of who's fastest and who's got work to do.
So this is going, these track conditions will be much closer to what we are expected to see tomorrow during qualifying session. So just an example, when free practice 1 was on earlier on, the track temperature was 33.3 degrees. It's now 10 degrees cooler, sitting down at 23 degrees. So the sun has pretty much set. We've had an F2 qualifying session out. We've had an F3 qualifying session out. So the track's a little bit cleaner. The wind, however, is still a little bit higher than expected, but it is certainly much lower than what we were experiencing early in free practice. So in free practice 1, it was around about 12.9 kilometres an hour. It's now down, well, gusting anywhere between 7.2 and sort of 10 kilometres an hour. So yeah, it's certainly closer to what they expect. So during this session, we will see them likely do qualifying runs and really try and get their car dialed back in. For example, the noise that you can hear through your ears right now was Hulkenberg just steaming down the main straight. They bolted straight away on the soft tyre. They stayed on the medium tyre for the entire previous session, and were actually pretty slow, struggling at the very back of the field. Well, both has into the tricky turn 4, where the camera just drops away. Either you're going to struggle with understeer there, or you're going to have a snap of oversteer. He, of course, is purple in the first sector, Harry, which means fastest overall. But there's plenty of cars coming out the pits, and just looking at the timing screen, not too many are opting really to go on the soft tyre. But no, as I say that, quite a few now, more heading out the pits, opting to use that soft tyre quite early on.
Yeah, just for those who want to do a sync up as well with the coverage, it's 56 minutes and 57, 56, 55 seconds remaining of this pre-practice 2 sessions. Most of the cars out on track, still waiting to see Verstappen, Alonso, Stroll and Russell make their way out of the pits, but everybody else is either on a lap or having just come out of the pits. We're following Nico Hulkenberg at the moment in the Haas, and you were just saying, you know, those 2 Haas's were right at the back of the field, a few seconds off the pace. But Aya Komatsu, who is the new team principal there, been promoted after they parted ways with Gunther Steiner, a prolific figure, not just only within Haas but within the paddock. He said throughout testing last week that Haas were really only focusing on their tyre woes that really compounded any kind of progress they could make last year in the races. They could maybe produce good 1-lap pace, but the races, they went backwards. That's all they're focusing on. And is that perhaps a reason why their pace was just so off in FP1, still focusing on just pure tyre degradation runs?
So we've heard, but we'll wait and see now, because they're out on the soft tyre. Hulkenberg is quickest at the moment, but he's the only one that's really set a lap time. We've got Esteban Ocon, who's just gone purple in the middle sector. Alpine, another team that are really struggling and not particularly happy with the car at the moment. So as I said, Harry, this is going to be a real good idea to where the car is. And actually, both Alpines have crossed the line, and they are slower than both the Haases. So that's really not a good start for Alpine. I spent quite a bit of time during the sessions down at Alpine, and yeah, the mood is, let's say, a little bit disappointing, to say the least. regarding where they are at the moment on the timesheets. As Perez jumps up to the top of the times, and they're tumbling now. Sainz crosses the line up to P2. Charles Leclerc, his teammate, jumps up to P1, and obviously everyone is waiting for Max Verstappen, but he is the only driver still sat in the pits. And of course, if you did tune into free practice 1, you would have heard Max several times on the radio really complaining about the downshift issues and the upshift issues with his gearbox and his gear sync in the car. So maybe still struggling, and they've maybe found an issue on Max's car, but he has decided, Harry, to stay in the pits for now.
Well, still in the pits, and we can head down to Rosanna Tennant.
Yeah, it doesn't look like there's an issue with the car currently. Maybe they've worked on it in between FP1 and FP2, but actually Max is just sitting in the car, the mechanics are waiting, the tyre blankets are on the tyres, so nothing going on at the moment. I think he's just biding his time. Was it in testing that he said he actually didn't need as many laps as he got during the testing 3 days here in Bahrain? So cool, calm customer, although as you say, Alice, in FP1, sounding a little frustrated with the car, but that's Max Verstappen, isn't it? The start of a weekend, complaining about upshifts, downshifts, or anything really, and then it all comes together. So I imagine it's all going to be fine this weekend, and the reliability wasn't an issue last year. I can't imagine it being a massive concern for them this year.
Well, you can never say never in Formula One, but I think we'll be inclined to agree. Lap times are coming in thick and fast, though. Lewis Hamilton is fastest on that soft compound of tyre with a 1:37.51. Then it's Leclerc, who's about 8.5 tenths back. Perez third, Sainz. Then it's the two Hasses, 5th and 6th. Gasly, Ocon, Albon, Sargent, the top 10. Bottas, Norris, Ricciardo, Piastri, Tsunoda, and Joe, the 16 drivers who have all set lap times in these early stages. But the two Aston Martins, Fernando Alonso at the wheel and Lance Stroll, currently on their fast laps as well. Fernando Alonso has just gone fastest of anybody in the middle sector. Aston Martin post-pre-season test has been a tricky one to gauge, especially after last year's pre-season test, because they made such a jump at the beginning of 2023. It's a little bit difficult to see where they are in the order at this current point, as Fernando Alonso goes second at 1:31.0, just shy 3 tenths behind Lewis Hamilton.
I think they look about where I thought they were, which is, next best. Well, I don't know about Ferrari, but
what do you think the order is?
So coming into the weekend, I thought it was Red Bull, followed by Mercedes and Ferrari. Very difficult to choose between them. Maybe Ferrari with an edge on over one lap, Mercedes with an edge over a race distance, and then Aston Martin, the next team after that, followed by McLaren. That's where they look like they are to me at the moment. I mean, Alonso's just, we don't know what fuel loads are on, but Alonso's just done a time just under 3 tenths slower than Hamilton's time on the soft tyre there, lying first and second in the timesheets at the moment, although I suspect that's about to stop because Max Verstappen's coming out of the pits.
Don't spoil it for everybody.
Verstappen emerges out of the pit lane, which feeds you right into turn 1 on the inside line. No traffic coming behind Verstappen, so he's free to move on to the racing line and get on his way on his outlap. Russell as well emerging from the pits, also on an outlap. 18 drivers have all set a time, so we're just waiting for Russell and Verstappen to get on with their programme. Hashtag BBC F1 as well, if you want to get involved.
A lot more than I was before.
Yeah.
That's Lando Norris saying I'm bottoming a lot more than I was before. Alice, can you just explain a bit about what he means by that?
So that is basically the rear of the car. Could be the rear, could be the front, could be the entire way across, touching the ground pretty much. And he's obviously feeling certain, that's drivers refer it to bottoming. So either bottoming out, going over curbs, and almost skidding along a curb. It's almost like you could say it's a skateboard sliding across, I don't know what they call it, sort of the poles. Pole or something. If you go over a curb. Or bottoming could be where you see the sparks flying out from underneath the cars and it's touching going down the straight. That can either unsettle the car mid-corner, entry, exit. Of course, you want to have the smoothest sort of ride as possible. Formula One cars are often touching these days, especially we get some fantastic pictures of sparks flying out the back of the car, but clearly Lando feels that that's a little bit too much for him at the moment, and it's unsettling the balance of the car. How do they change that? Could be ride height, could be spring adjustments as well. There are numerous changes that the team will be able to do to improve his ride. But I tell you what, George Russell looks like he is struggling with a little bit of bottoming as well, as he was really digging into the curb on the exit there of that's turn 8.
Sparks are flying as he comes into the braking zone of the left-hander of turn 10 as well.
Really is. He's on the soft tyre, so him and Max at the moment are the ones that are doing some pretty decent sectors on that soft tyre. Max, believe it or not, is not fastest in the first sector at the moment. That still sticks with Lewis Hamilton.
This is the sound of George Russell coming into the braking zone and the right-hander of turn 13 as he then heads along the back straight towards the final 2 corners. A double right-hander. There are technically 15 corners on this track, but turn 15 is really taken flat out, which Russell does so. He comes towards the DRS line, the rear wing flap opens and he crosses the line with a 1:31.821. That is his 7th fastest at the moment. His teammate Lewis Hamilton is still fastest in front of Fernando Alonso. Leclerc, Perez, Stroll the top 5. Perez has actually just got himself up into 3rd in front of Leclerc, then Stroll the top 5, Sainz, Russell, Hulkenberg, Magnussen and Gasly the top 10. But this really is the representative session that we're going to see. The second practice session earlier on today for FP1 was in the daylight, much hotter temperatures. Qualifying, which takes place tomorrow, remember it's a bit of an altered weekend format. Qualifying will take place on the Friday, and then on Saturday we will have the race rather than the usual Grand Prix Sunday. So just a reminder for that, and that will all take place under the lights here at the Bahrain International Circuit. But Verstappen, with a flyer, comes across the line, puts his Red Bull up into 4th spot. Half a second adrift of Lewis Hamilton's time at the moment, with 48 minutes and 2 seconds remaining of FP2.
Amount of people walking down the paddock earlier were telling me, are Red Bull sandbagging? I was like, I've got no idea. Why are you asking me that? As if I'm an engineer at Red Bull. But Max had a real good look at the timing board as he went across the start-finish line and into the braking zone of the first corner on his cool-down lap. So he was having a good look, as you can do as drivers on a cool-down lap when you're not going particularly quickly. Have a little look at the screen to see whereabouts you are. Maybe you can even I actually know a couple of drivers, not myself, that have learnt off looking at the TV screen on a cool-down lap, because they're like, oh, that driver's taking an interesting line. That's the sound you can hear now is riding on board with Kevin Magnussen. This is a replay. He runs ever so wide on the exit of the final corner. Say final corner, turn 14, 15 is apparently the final corner. So does Carlos Sainz, kicking up plenty of dust.
And that can go terribly wrong for you. Charles Leclerc nearly displays that. Here's what he had to say on the radio.
Big mistake in last corner.
Copy, we've seen that.
Check maybe the flow of the car just to make sure it's all good by going wide in the last corner.
Okay, we'll check that.
I mean, the last corner is not the harsh curb. It's when you exit turn 2 that's pretty harsh. But that could be the wind, though, couldn't it, Andrew?
Indeed, and one of the things we need to keep an eye on today is tyre usage and what they're going to do in the race. So obviously they're going to qualify in Q3, the last session, on the soft tyre, but they have free tyre choice for the race. So are they going to start on the soft? I think probably not. We'll have to wait and see. But tyre degradation is always very high in Bahrain. It's hard to get a read right now, but what I will say is it's very unusual for so many front runners to use the soft tyre for their first runs in second practice. Normally that would be the medium tyre if the soft tyre was going to be a favoured race tyre. So I would guess from that it's more likely that people are going to try to avoid the soft in the race by and large.
Yeah, I agree. I think the degradation really for the soft is too high. But obviously for qualifying it is by far the fastest tyre, as George Russell is once again chucking up loads of sparks out the back of his car, and we ride on board with him now just as he was going wide. To me that looked like the exit of turn 11. Yeah, and he's lost 2.5 seconds to Lewis Hamilton, who is fastest in that middle sector. Actually no, it's Alonso who's fastest in the middle sector, sorry. So that is the issue with the wind that's gusting like this. And looking at the radar on our timing screen, it is going up and down, isn't it, Harry? With that wind, it is really gusty. But that's part and parcel of Bahrain and this type of wind that we were discussing earlier in free practice 1. And is that a little bit of flame?
We're just seeing a replay on the bottom of George Russell's car, and Russell in the Mercedes is one of the cars that has been kicking up the sparks the most, bouncing along, and it almost looks like there's a little bit of flame coming out. Or is it a light? Because I know we have seen lights on the underside as well.
That looked like part of the floor, so the wooden plank that will be underneath the floor has been getting a little bit too hot, rubbing and sparking somewhere along the tracks, but it appears to have gone out now by the breeze of continuing his lap. But we'll keep an eye on that, of course.
Well, I think he's just come into the pits. Rosanna Tennant's down there.
Yeah, they've just wheeled him back into his garage. No flames down here. Of course, we see that with the skid blocks, don't we? The titanium skid blocks sparking. It looks great under the lights. It even looks great in the daytime now as well. They run them so low. But all the media have run up to the Mercedes garage to see if they can see what's going on underneath George's car. And I have to say, the mechanics of Mercedes, they're not underneath the car. I was expecting them all to dive underneath and check the floor of the car, but they're actually busy unscrewing some bodywork, I think, to adjust the front suspension. So they obviously are not concerned, and I think both drivers have just come in, so I think it's all part of the programme. I don't think it was an emergency stop, so to speak. Oh, and now one mechanic is down on the ground having a little look underneath, but that it can also be part of what they were planning to do anyway.
Thanks, Rosanna.
So what's going on there is that with these ground effect cars, with the Venturi underbodies, the Venturi is kind of like an inverted wing that runs along the floor on either side of the chassis. They want to get them as close to the floor as they can without triggering bouncing, so that's a disruption of the airflow, or wearing the plank too much. Well, those things can happen independently or they can happen together. That looked to me like Mercedes are running that car a little bit too low. Which they're going to want to do, because the lower you go, as long as you don't get porpoising, the more downforce you've got, therefore the more speed you've got. And remember, it's not that many races ago that Mercedes got caught out with that in Austin, when Lewis Hamilton was disqualified after finishing second because the skid blocks in the plank had worn away too much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. That was the voice of the BBC's chief F1 writer, Andrew Benson. Rosanna Tennant is down in the pit lane. My name's Harry Benjamin. Alongside me is the racing driver Alice Powell. And the sound you're hearing is Alex Albon in the Williams as he tackles the left-hander of turn 11, coming through the middle sector, up through turn 12. Quite often the most affected by the wind around this track. Personal best sector 1 and sector 2 as he makes his way now down along the back straight towards the right-hander of turn 14 and then the kink of 15. And this is where we saw a few drivers have a few hairy moments as the car is dragged out towards the red and white rumble strip before you can quickly find yourself into the wall. No such problems for Albon as he comes across the line and goes 8th fastest in that Williams, which they seem to feel like they have a decent baseline from testing, but they were late with their car, had a few reliability niggles during pre-season testing last week. But Alex Albon, what a stellar season he had last year, and if there's going to be anybody who can get the maximum out of that car, it will be him. Logan Sargent will line up alongside him back for a second season, and he's a driver under pressure as well. Let's head down to the pits again. Rosanna's there.
Plenty of work going on George Russell's car, Harry.
Understood.
That was Max Verstappen talking to his engineer, GP Lambiese. I'm standing outside George Russell's garage at Mercedes. Mercedes mechanics jumped on the car straight away as he came in. Of course, we've seen that sparking, a sort of flame underneath their car. They've pulled off a lot of the bodywork. They're now adjusting the front suspension. The front wing is off. That's on a stand. And Alice, if it is indeed a problem, like Andrew was alluding to, in terms of how low they're running the car, by adjusting the front suspension, would that help? Is that why they're doing that at this stage?
Yeah, and that's something that I mentioned. There's plenty of things you can do to adjust, but it might just not be a suspension change or a ride height change. It could be a front wing, a wing change as well. It all depends on the feedback from the driver. If they feel like actually this touching is not too bad, because sometimes you can get a little bit of a touching in a corner and it helps to rotate the car ever so slightly. It doesn't quite look like that's George's issue or what he would be saying at the moment. But it all depends on this detailed feedback that the drivers give when they come into the box. That he wouldn't have come in and said, oh yeah, it's touching too much, and that's it. He would have given a much more deeper explanation on the radio. Sometimes the teams don't like to do it on the radio either. They will have the engineer come over to them just in case someone is, or any other team is listening in to the radios. So it's all about the feedback that the driver, and there's, as I just said, there are plenty of changes that the teams can do to their car to make the ride better for the drivers and improve the lap time. As we just saw, Rosanna, a ride not so great for Alonso, who got a huge snap of oversteer on the exit of turn 4 and did a very good job to save it.
Did a very good job indeed. That would have given even a man as mighty and experienced as Fernando Alonso, the eyes might have widened there slightly. A multiple winner around here is Fernando Alonso, winning back in 2010, and then of course in 2005 and 2006 with Renault, 2010 with Ferrari. The man who was the only man on the grid who was here for the first iteration of the Bahrain Grand Prix when it came onto the calendar in 2004. He's raced all three of the layouts that Formula 1 has used. The standard Grand Prix circuit that we're on now. There's also the slightly longer endurance circuit, which we used back in 2010, I think it was. And then of course in 2020 we had the Sakir Grand Prix, which was the outer layout. I really quite liked that layout. I kind of missed that one. I don't know if you had. Did you have a favourite layout of the three?
Do you know what? Well, the race was really good, wasn't it? As the sound you can hear is us riding aboard and having a replay of Fernando Alonso getting a bit of understeer, waiting, and as that front end just gripped, the rear had enough, and quite a violent snap of oversteer, and that can either go two ways there. He could have continued to say, well, he had a tank slapper and spin one way or the other, but he did a good job, and of course he's a pro, so good save there by Alonso.
Pro is an interesting word to describe Fernando Alonso, isn't it?
Well, he's a pro. Some people might not think he's a pro, but I think he's a pro.
Yeah, I was just thinking he might be underselling him a little.
What would you describe him as?
Surely not. An all-time great.
I'd say he doesn't have the all-time race record, though. That goes to Pedro de la Rosa for this race, who's watching on an Aston Martin colours in the pit lane with a lap 1:31.4 back in 2005 in the McLaren. Rosanna.
Yeah, Pedro was saying in the lead up to this weekend that he's sure his race record's going to go. So maybe he's watching thinking he's going to lose that little record to his name. I'm standing outside George Russell's garage still because the mechanics have been asked to come to the front of the garage, and they've got their backs to us and they are blocking the work that's going on in front of them. We can't really see what's going on now, but there's a lot of finger work going on. That's what I can see. A lot of bolts being tightened back up. The front suspension has definitely been worked on, and ride height potentially, as Alice was saying, or maybe trying to raise the car up a little bit so that they don't have... That was Lando Norris, I think. I couldn't actually see, but I can hear. I think it was him.
Yeah.
And they are working very, very quickly in the Mercedes garage because, of course, this is still almost testing, isn't it, guys? I mean, I know it's FP2, but there's still a lot to learn about these cars. And it was George Russell yesterday during Media Day saying that this car has been designed around Lewis Hamilton's wishes. It was almost pointed, wasn't it, Andrew? He wanted to make the point that this was all Lewis's idea. Almost, I felt, like a sort of get out. In case the car doesn't suit him further into the season, he's already kind of put that out there to the media and to all of us saying, yeah, this is all about Lewis, this car, so if it doesn't suit me, that's why.
Yeah, it was really interesting, Rosanna, wasn't it? He said it 2 or 3 times in the course of about a 20-minute press conference, and I don't really understand what point he was trying to make. Actually, I asked James Allison about that this morning, the Mercedes technical director, and he gave it rather short shrift, as I suspected he might do. He pointed out that, of course, the drivers give their feedback on what they like and don't like about the car, but any decisions the engineers make on design, whether it be side pod shape or cockpit positioning or steering, whatever, that's their decision, and it's all based on the numbers and performance. So But all that, and Russell knows that, which is why it was such an interesting thing for him to say. And I think it does betray what you would expect, actually, that and what people expect to happen up and down the pit lane. With Hamilton leaving that team at the end of the year, there's bound to be some more tensions emerge than were there last year when everything was harmonious and they thought they were going to be partners for the foreseeable future.
Don't you think it's interesting as well, because when George Russell was paired with Lewis Hamilton, everyone was wondering whether it would be okay because they have such different body types and body shapes. George is much taller than Lewis, and there was all that sort of like, oh, is it the best partnership because they're going to build the car around one of the athletes and not the other? And so maybe this is George feeling frustrated that it's been designed around Lewis, and of course he's then going to have to deal with this car going into the next year, and Lewis will be long gone. So I can imagine frustrating for George as he now leaves the garage on the soft tyre, but frustrating for the British driver because he's going to effectively lead this team. And another interesting part of yesterday, Andrew, I don't know if you agree, was when Lewis was asked whether George is the kind of guy that can lead the team. It took a while to get going with his answer then as well, didn't he?
Yes, and again, that's about the tensions. Look, on the car designed around Hamilton thing, I don't think that's true. They've designed the fastest car they can, and I think here's Leclerc's radio.
On the carbon 4.
Understood. So Charles Leclerc made a mistake at turn 4 in his Ferrari. That's another mistake from him. The last one was at the last corner. What Russell also said, Rosanna, I'm sure you remember, was that actually him and Hamilton were giving very similar feedback as to what they wanted from the car. And the overriding thing was that last year's car and the one before was very nervous at the rear. They never had confidence on corner turning. They always thought it was probably going to bite them. And that was a major thing for them to resolve for this year's car. According to both the drivers and James Allison, they have been effective in doing that. The car's much more predictable on corner entry, but their problem is they don't think it's quite quick enough to challenge Red Bull yet.
Well, could Lewis Hamilton find something to challenge? Probably not. He's grasping at straws a little bit, but across the line he's currently fastest. He's on a good lap once again. He's on the soft compound of tyre. Goes faster still by almost 0.4 of a second. Hamilton with a 1:33.74. Sainz is behind him on an outlap at the moment. Piastri, Hulkenberg, Alonso, the top 5. The sound you're hearing now is Sergio Perez in the Red Bull as he comes round the final 2 corners. We've seen a lot of moments there of the cars being dragged out and causing a few snaps on the steering wheel. No such luck for Sergio Perez across the line, losing time in that final sector. Still improves overall, but stays 6th fastest, just in front of his teammate Verstappen, who's on an outlap at the moment. Further back in the pack is Stroll and Albon, who round out the top 10. Then it's Sargent, Magnussen, Ricciardo, Russell, Tsunoda the top 15. Bottas, Ocon, Zhou, Gasly, and Norris down in 20th and last at the moment. So I think some things that Lando Norris and McLaren want to work through. He came on the radio a little earlier with some work to be done on that McLaren to try and get that more into the sweet spot of where he wants it. But at the back at the moment, it's looking like it's a bit of a nip and tuck between the Alpines, the Saubers, and the Hasses, although they were almost 2 to 3 seconds off in free practice 1. In a more representative session, well, Hulkenberg finds himself in 4th and Magnussen is in 12th on the soft compound of tyre.
Yeah.
And we don't know the fuel loads either.
No, we don't, but much better place than where they were this morning as Max Verstappen steams down into turn 1, just about gets his RB20 stopped for the braking zone, manoeuvres past, and RB, as he heads now into the real tricky turn 4, doesn't use as much entry curb, as what Charles Leclerc did. I think Charles Leclerc used definitely too much, and that's why he got that lock-up. But he's not fastest in the first sector, is Max Verstappen. And last year we didn't say that very often, did we? He is just under 1/10 of a second off Lewis Hamilton in that sector as he rises up the hill through turn 9 and then into the tricky braking zone of turn 10, squirts on the throttle, DRS opens as soon as he reaches the line, and steaming down now into turn 11 where George Russell ran slightly wide earlier on, and we're going to flash up now as he's going to just leave the middle sector. We'll have a rough idea of what this time is like. Again, loses another 10th to Oscar Piastri, who has the fastest middle sector of everyone. So at the moment he is 2 tenths down, Harry, as on Lewis Hamilton as he comes towards the end of the lap.
Is this the end of dominance for Red Bull? Are we witnessing it right now? Round the final
I'm not
corner.
getting my hopes up. As much as I take my hat off to Red Bull as Max jumps up now to P4, but he's 4 tenths off, nearly 5 tenths if we're going to round it up, 5 tenths off Lewis Hamilton. I'm not getting my hopes up, as much as I have to take my hat off to Adrian Newey and the Red Bull team for the incredible engineering that they have done in that RB car.
Lance was in the middle of the way, someone, so they don't look at the mirrors.
Yeah, copy. I've seen that.
That's Charles Leclerc complaining on the radio, mainly towards, so the FIA stewards can hear it. Charles Leclerc in the Ferrari is hurtling down the main straight as Lance Stroll comes out of the pit lane much slower as he releases the pit limiter, and the pit lane exit feeds right in towards the apex of turn 1. So if you are dawdling, you very quickly can come a cropper, and Leclerc just having to ease off the throttle there to allow for room and no contact. So I'm sure that'll be looked at. It's not the first time we've seen that one. Do you remember back in, was it 2014? Was it during the race? Pastor Maldonado in the Lotus came out of the pit lane and Gutierrez turned in the Sauber and he biffed him over, and it was a complete 360 flip. So obviously we don't want to see that, but that is the kind of incident that can happen if you aren't looking in your mirrors in that tricky turn 1. On Red Bull, Verstappen went 4th fastest. His teammate Sergio Perez is in the pits at the moment, currently down in 9th. This is another, again, it's a big year for Perez as well. He's already been told by the team that if he does not improve his qualifying performances, if he can't close that gap to his teammates, then his contract is looking less and less likely to be renewed at the end of the year. And of course, he is one of the 13 pre-Hamilton signing for Ferrari, whose contract is up at the end of this year. So he's got a big year ahead of him as the Mexican.
A lot of drivers have got a big year
well, it's
ahead of him.
This is the silly season, isn't it? Already.
It is. Oh, and I love it. And it's only just the start. But yeah, Perez. And we were discussing, weren't we, over lunch earlier on, who would want that second Red Bull seat?
I can't. I've spoken to, a former Renault racing driver in Formula One.
I wonder who that was.
Time and time again. And I get the idea that, you've got to back yourself. Formula One drivers think they are the greatest things on earth, and they think they are the fastest. And you jump in a Red Bull, you'll get the chance to win a race, maybe get more podiums, get more silverware in your cupboard at home. But as Logan Sargent cuts across, that's coming out of turn 2, isn't it? Yeah. Through 3. So he sort of cut across the gravel and the sand there and rejoined. So Sargent's lap ruined there on that day. Another driver under pressure, will come to him. But I just can't see, having looked at the track history with Red Bull and that second seat, Gasly, Albon, careers absolutely trashed. They've had to go, and luckily have, rebuilt their career elsewhere. But that's the risk, I suppose, you take. Is that, am I just not a good enough am I not a competitive nature enough? I thought you were going to say
you're not a good enough driver. I was mate, no. I don't think you'd fit in
I don't think so. But is my brain just not inclined in that direction? I would much rather be outperforming in a Williams, like Alex Albon is probably doing, than perhaps being absolutely trounced and being made to look a bit amateurish in that second Red Bull.
I mean, if someone said to me, hey, if I was racing in Formula 1, that is, of course, would you like to go in that second Red Bull seat? I'm like, wow, this is the championship winning car. This is potentially the best car on the grid. Of course, because as you said, it gives you that opportunity to drive the best car on the grid. It gives you that opportunity to potentially win a race, win the championship. As Charles Leclerc is back on the radio complaining of drivers impeding his lap, and it gives you that chance to possibly make a name for yourself by challenging Max. And I think anyone that steps foot in that Red Bull seat and does challenge Max and puts Max under pressure is doing a good job, because of course Max is the number 1 driver at at that team. You know, he stepped in and he got his first win straight away. He did a great job, and he is a huge talent. But of course, then comes the pressure, and as you've already touched on, how it's really broken. And there's a podcast that Alex Albon did and recorded, and if you haven't listened to it, it is fantastic, about how his approach during that season and how he thought, I've got it all under control, and then that racing pressure that comes, and you almost, when you're under that pressure, and Formula One and motorsport at that level as a whole is so intense, and you can at times feel really alone when you've got that pressure. Even though you've got a great support network around you, it can be a really, really lonely place, because at the end of the day, if you're not winning, every driver wants to win, every driver has their goal, but when you're in that Red Bull seat and you're up against Max, it can be probably quite lonely and under pressure. So I kind of haven't really answered the question yet. I'd love to have that seat, but in reality, it is the toughest seat to step into in Formula One, because you're up against Max.
I suppose the other way to look at it as well, particularly in respect to Sergio Perez, is that at the end of 2020, wasn't it, he was looking at the end of his career in Formula One, having done a magnificent job of last to first in a racing point at this very circuit on the outer loop layout, looking at the end of his career, and Red Bull offered him essentially a lifeline. And I suppose for him it was a win-win situation. I get to stay in Formula One with at the time one of the top teams, the best team going into the next season, and get more silverware out of it. Because before but that Perez's sort of reputation beforehand was best of the rest, the tyre whisperer, could get a Force India or a Sauber on the podium, and then suddenly I find it so fascinating how quickly our perception of a driver can change so quickly when they're given different machinery, and suddenly it seems like they're underperforming.
Your ideal driver combination, I'm sure Benny can come in on this as well, is you want one driver that, like Max, who's super, super fast, and then you want another driver that maybe is
Michael Schumacher and a Rubens Barrichello,
essentially, or
a Felipe Massa and a Fernando Alonso, sort of.
That then is just right behind them, that is sort of the rear gunner that can protect that driver so they can get the Drivers' Championship, but they're also racking up real good points for the Constructors' Championship. Because we've seen what happened in many years across the history of Formula One, and the most recent that springs to my mind is the Hamilton-Rosberg, where they're both so competitive against each other. It can cause a massive headache for the team. So actually, you know, Red Bull having a second driver that is, okay, maybe a tenth, 2 tenths off Max is ideal for them, really. And you could essentially say that's for any team, because as soon as you get them on par and they're both fighting for those race wins, it can become quite tricky.
Well, another example of more recent times, off the back of the Hamilton-Rosberg situation, Lewis Hamilton and Valtteri Bottas, who ended up being probably one of Hamilton's favourite teammates. Bottas now finds himself in the Sauber team. He's currently down in 17th. He's in the pits, and I think Rosanna's lurking outside.
Yeah, and he's in a bit of trouble. Valtteri Bottas and a team representative from his team, Sauber, are required to report to the stewards at 7:30 local time, so after the session has finished. And that's because he is deemed to have exited the pit lane while the red light was on at 5:59 and 56 seconds. So just moments before the green light went. I'm sure they will argue their timing was off, but he has to go and see the stewards. I'm not really sure what penalty may be applied, if any, Andrew or Alice. You'll probably know. I'm sure you've never exited the pit lane ahead of time, Alice.
Oh no, or usually late, probably. But no, we actually saw it on the replay, Rosanna. He literally was doing a practice start, so he pulled over to the right-hand side. You've got to do it in what they call the slow lane on pit exit, and he literally, it was a second, couple of seconds, was it, Harry? Just went over that line to position himself to do a practice start. But that counts as leaving the pit lane.
Yeah, well, we know Valtteri's got an excellent reaction time. He nearly I think was accused of jumping the start. I think it was Belgium a few years ago, but actually it was just because his reaction time was so incredibly quick. He got the run on everybody in front of him. 20 minutes and 30 seconds, 29-28 remain of free practice 2. It got a little bit quiet on track at the last few moments. Really, only Fernando Alonso was making his way around. He's on the soft compounder tyre and managed to get up to third fastest. He's behind Hamilton and Russell. Sainz is fourth, Piastri fifth. Verstappen is on an out lap now, just starting his flying lap, is in sixth. Hulkenberg, Stroll, Leclerc and Perez the top 10. Then it's Albon, Ricciardo, Sargent, Magnussen, Tsunoda the top 15. Gasly, Bottas, Ocon, Joe and Norris 20th and last. It's a bit of a 50-50 of who's in the pits and who isn't. Verstappen has just started a flyer now as he makes his way through the second DRS zone. Slam shut on the brakes into the right-hander of turn 4. You run a little bit out wide there. Very easy to put all 4 wheels off the white line. Track limits there is being watched and has been watched a lot in the past. Verstappen actually not really pushing on this lap as he makes his way through the S's that make up turns 5, 6 and 7. You're quickly going left, right, then left on the steering wheel before coming into the braking zone in the right-hander of turn 8. And you then head uphill towards the cambered turn 9 and 10. So easy to head back downhill to snatch a brake, lock up. Verstappen's not really pushing too hard through there, so he's clean and smooth as you like. On to the next straight. Quick dose of DRS, that drag reduction system takes you to the left-hander of turn 11 as you now start to head back uphill through the right-hander of 12, taking that flat. That's where the wind is really affecting these cars, often has done in history around this circuit. Verstappen through turn 13, down the back straight. No DRS for this straight as he comes towards the 100-metre board. Hits the brakes and then round the final 2 corners, 14 and 15, the double right-hander. And as he comes across the line once again to complete a lap of the Bahrain International Circuit on that soft compounder tyre, but focusing more perhaps on how this tyre may well run in the race, going a little bit longer on that. He's not got the DRS board open, which is the DRS flap open, which is always a bit of an indicator to see what kind of run they're doing. So he's not chasing outright performance. His engineer, Jean-Pierre Lambiase, head in his hands, concentrating on the pit wall. But Verstappen then currently down in 6th with his fastest lap time at the moment. Are we going to get on the... we did have a question come in on hashtag BBCF1. Forgive me, the name has gone. But in terms of... well, first of all, a couple of team name changes, evolvements. We're going with Sauber and RB. RB with Daniel Ricciardo, the former AlphaTauri team, topped free practice 1. Alice, are we getting on the hype train?
In what sense? Are we getting on the
Is this RB?
RB hype train?
RB, are they going to be on for
I'm going to wait at the platform for a little bit longer.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah,
fine.
That's okay.
How do you think Daniel Ricciardo is looking at this season? Because this is a bit of an audition year, isn't it? If Sergio Perez underperforms and Daniel Ricciardo beats Yuki Tsunoda, logic says, well, Daniel Ricciardo gets the promotion back into a Red Bull.
Does he? Is that what we're going for?
I'd like your debate on this, please.
Is that? I mean,
would you disagree?
No, I mean, as I said, they will look for a good backup for Max. They've already got Max Verstappen, who's won 2 world championships, 3rd, 4th, 5th, potentially 6th, 7th. He can win a lot more. So they don't need someone to come in and challenge and be, actually, we need someone who's going to stick us to win world championships. They don't need a driver, they need someone as backup. Daniel will be pretty good backup, but of course he's not going to want to step in there and be a backup, is he? He's not. He's going to want to go in there and be and challenge for a world title. So Red Bull have of course assessed that, but going into this year, Daniel has of course went into last year not having much of a pre-season at all because he was chucked in at Zandvoort and then had of course the incident hitting the wall at turn 3 and damaging his hand. So he's had a winter now to real build up and get race fit and get ready for a a full campaign, another full campaign. So he's done everything properly, like you should if you're building up to a race season. But he'll be a good challenger for Yuki, and he's certainly showing that at the moment. He's 0.4 of a second quicker than his teammate. As now, Charles Leclerc, his radio's been a bit busy in this session. His engineer coming on the radio telling him that the wind intensity is increasing, and actually it certainly is. So we're up now to whereabouts we were for pre-practice 1 in terms of the wind.
It's worth saying, I think, at this moment, that this is a really weird second practice session. It's absolutely not going the way it normally does. Normally there's a run on a set of tyres with sort of some kind of medium fuel load for setup, then they do a qualifying simulation run, and then they get into the long runs. None of that seems to be happening today.
I'm so glad you said that, because I was thinking, what? Hang on, this does not feel like a normal session.
I mean, the lap times that we're seeing are race-type lap times on the soft, that they're all doing on the soft tyre, and I noticed that Max Verstappen's last lap was a 36.5, for example. Russell's a 36.8. Lewis Hamilton's a 36.7. Sergio Perez a 36.9. So, you know, that doesn't look like too far away from sort of race ballpark pace, but at the moment I just don't know what to make of this. It's really, really unusual. And what's weird about it is that most of the teams did a race simulation and testing, but Red Bull didn't. Not a full one anyway. Yeah, I don't know what's going on, frankly, and I don't know whether we're going to have any more clarity, unfortunately, by the end of this session or not. It would appear not at this stage.
Well, the intrigue lasts longer then. We'll have another FP3 session tomorrow, and before qualifying will reveal the true hand of everybody. So it is a bit of a stab in the dark at the moment as to who exactly is where. It's a bit of a mismatch. Hamilton and Russell are currently 1 and 2. Alonso, Sainz, Piastri, the top 5. Verstappen, Hulkenberg, Stroll, Leclerc, Perez, the top 10. Albon, Ricciardo, Sargent, Magnussen, Tsunoda, the top 15. Gasly's on an outlap at the moment. His teammate's on a quick lap, or well, is on a lap. Gasly is in 16th. Ocon is in 18th. Bottas splits them. Joe and Norris are 19th and 20th. Norris is curious. He is out on track, not chasing outright performance at the moment, it seems. But I suppose one of the big talking points ahead of this season is silly season, is the driver market, which was absolutely blown open with the news in the preseason that Lewis Hamilton had activated a get-out clause with his Mercedes contract. We all thought he'd signed on for a 2-year deal. He had, but there was an opt-out. It seemed he saw something that he didn't like within Mercedes and something he quite liked at the Scuderia, and will race in red from 2025 onwards as he replaces Carlos Sainz. And that, Alice, has blown it all wide open, because there are now 12 drivers out of contract come the end of this year. Who's going to go where? Can we start with Mercedes, and who do they put in that second seat? Because I know you're all over the support series. That's what you work a lot with Alpine on their junior drivers. Mercedes have this young gun called Andrea Kimi Antonelli, who is embarking on his first season in Formula 2. He's here this weekend racing in F2. It seems like there is a lot of hype around him and that he is plan A at the moment. What is it about Antonelli? Do you think that is a realistic move for him to be the Hamilton replacement?
Benson touched on it earlier on in free practice 1 about how he has been dubbed sort of like a Max Verstappen-esque for a test that he did in F3 last year. But he has really taken the junior categories by storm. Came into F4, you could say pretty much dominated that championship, winning Italian. He then moved on to Formula Regional, which is just below F3. Won that championship quite comfortably. Same with the championship in the Middle East in the winter. He's made the skip. He's not done the traditional go to F3, then go to F2 like Oscar did. He's skipped that, gone straight into F2 with Prema, who are potentially one of the best teams in the junior categories out there. And he's up against Ollie Behrman, Of course, we saw him at the end of last year testing in the Haas, and a very, very impressive British junior young driver as well.
But he's now a Ferrari reserve along with
Ferrari reserve along with Haas. A great guy, very, very fast. So I think there's every right Toto should big him up, because I think he is a very good talent. He's going to be having a testing program this year with Mercedes. That basically means he's going to be driving one of their older F1 cars probably 3 years ago, acclimatizing him. They'll be assessing him. They'll be looking at all the data just to have a look to see if he is ready, if he will be ready at the end of the year, if he's capable enough to then jump into that Mercedes seat. And you know, Oscar did a pretty good job, didn't he, from winning F2, had a year out. Okay, he did a lot of testing with Alpine. That's why that whole Alpine saga sort of got a bit tetchy, because he did a lot of testing. Alpine invested a lot of money into Oscar's testing in F1, but he still did the job. He had a very impressive rookie year. So I would say we'll have to sit tight and we'll just watch and wait for this story to develop.
And if it's not Andrea Kimi Antonelli, the paddock rumours are that plan B seems to be Fernando Alonso from making a move from Aston Martin. Alonso in a Mercedes alongside Russell. Alonso in any team could spell fireworks. It works quite nicely at the moment with Stroll alongside, but an Alonso and a Russell line-up at Mercedes.
I like that. I like the sound of that. Alonso will want to... He just wants to win races. He wants to win another world championship. You know, it's amazing that he hasn't won more. It's not just swung the right way for him. So if he gets this opportunity, again, he's probably going to sit there, and Benny can come on in and probably give more into this and see how Mercedes gets on in the first sort of few races, first half of the season. There's no rush for Mercedes to make the decision, not at all. So he'll sit tight and he'll wait and see. By come, let's say, middle of the year, we might have a better idea of how it might pan out.
Yeah, sorry, Alice, I just turned off your TV screen.
I was thinking, why are you turning off the TVs?
I put my foot out and I flicked the buttons underneath the table. Anyway, I think the 2012 World Championship was one of the biggest sporting injustices in history. That he didn't win that. I think that was one of the greatest seasons that any Formula 1 driver has ever produced in the history of the sport. To take that car, which was the fourth fastest car on the grid, to within 3 or 4 points of the World Championship and lose out at the final race in the way he did, he should have been world champion that year. And I think everybody in the sport who's not working for Red Bull would probably agree. But yes, it would be remarkable if he returned to Mercedes, wouldn't it, after all the history that's happened between them with the Spygate controversy and everything, which just everyone can do a quick internet search on that. There's a podcast series that the BBC did last year, and some articles that I've written in the past about what happened, and there's basically a load of bad blood between Alonso and Mercedes. But he's definitely, times have moved on. Lewis Hamilton's left, or is leaving, and he's definitely on their list as a potential for next year. There's a new Mercedes CEO now, of course. A lot of water's gone under the bridge since 2007. So who knows what's going to happen. I think default, they'd probably go for Antonelli if they think he's ready. But I don't think, I may be right about this, Alice. He had a particularly difficult qualifying session in F2
yeah, he did. Both
today.
the Premers did, yeah.
But Mercedes are also putting on an extensive testing program for him this year as well, to try and get him up to speed, because they don't want to miss out on this next young talent. Like when Verstappen was coming on board, there was a bit of a bidding war for Max Verstappen services, which Red Bull won. And Antonelli's not the first driver to skip Formula 3 either. You know, look at Verstappen.
Yeah, exactly.
Bottas as well, Alonso, Raikkonen back in the day as well, all made jumps through up into the rank just below Formula 1 and whatever guise it's been called for F3000, GP2, F2, you name it.
It's a tricky one for young drivers who are on this ladder to Formula 1. Just for starters, it's the cost. You know, if you want to run with a top team in Formula 3, you need a pretty large Harry-sized wallet of looking at about 2 million euros. If you've done a first season, you'll have to do a second one if you're not ready for F2. when you get to F2, again, you're looking at anything between 2.5. Some people, I've heard rumours, are paying nearly 4 million for a seat in F2, which is, who has that money? It's just absolutely insane. And then the second thing is you can win F2. You could have spent that money. You know, the drivers in F2 and F3, they're not getting paid. Yeah, this crazy thing where people say, well, they must be earning loads of money. No, they are paying. They might get some support from an F1 academy, from an F1 team, but they still have to find money of their own. And then by, let's say, Antonelli or Oscar, let's use him for an example. The seats were full in F1. He'd done it. He'd won regional, won F3, won F2, all in his rookie years. And then he couldn't move on to anything else. And that is the tough reality as well for these young drivers, that in any of these junior single-seater categories, they are fighting to eventually try and grab one of the 20 seats that are available in Formula One, and they're not often available, are they?
Well, the F2 champion, the top two from last year. Vivo Drogovic still on the sidelines at Aston Martin. Teo Porcher, backed by a Sauber F1 Academy. He's gone off to Japan to race in Super Formula, which I suppose is the closest championship you can get to Formula One at the moment. But he has to go there just to kind of almost kill time, really, for a year and then see what the options are. And second place in F2 was Frederic Vesti, and he's here this weekend on the sidelines working as a reserve for Mercedes. But they just hit this ceiling, and then they can't go anywhere, which is why over the winter and Andretti were rejected for being an F1 team and on the grid for 2025 and 2026 by Formula One. There's so many reasons why that gets people upset, but one of those reasons is that could have provided 2 more seats for drivers. It might not have been Vesti or Porcher, but it opens up an opportunity to have more exciting, diverse drivers on the grid, and even wider. You know, if we think bigger picture here, that's another, couple of thousand people employed at a factory at one of the biggest brands in America. So there's a lot of knock-on effect, isn't there, within all of this. So we'll be talking about this until the deal's done, really, won't we? Until we know who's going to be in that second Mercedes seat. Carlos Sainz is the other big hitter. Where does he go? Ousted by Ferrari. He was sat next to Lewis Hamilton in the press conference at the start of this weekend, but they both seem to get on fairly well, actually. I think Carlos Sainz said, if I was Lewis, I would have done the same thing. So there's certainly no bad blood between Sainz and Hamilton, but this does open up options for Carlos Sainz. Where does he go? Lots of talk around Sauber when they become Audi. That one still to rule on. We're coming into the last closing minutes of this session, and it has been a bit of a weird session in terms of trying to get a read on the data. The teams haven't been doing things in the normal order of FP2, doing fast runs, then race runs, and hashtag BBC F1 has come in. A lot of people saying, is Andrew trying to get out of doing long run corner? Well, we're going to half do it. We're going to do an unofficial long run corner. Andrew Benson, what can you tell us? What have you been able to gather?
Well, there's quite a lot going on off the track right now, and I've been distracted by it a little bit.
I didn't think I saw you sort of furrowing your brow.
I can't go into details just yet, but so I've not been paying as much attention as I would normally do to the TV screens, and it didn't help that I switched them off with my foot a few minutes ago either. But I would say that just glancing up at the screens as much as I could once I realised that these were the long runs and the teams weren't running the session as well as they would normally do, it does look to me that as if Max Verstappen has been slightly the quickest car on these soft tyre race simulation runs. Also looking pretty competitive is Charles Leclerc's Ferrari. But I would not want to make any firm conclusions, even less firm, Harry, than normally in long run corner on the back of a session like this. I dare say I may find a little bit more out later on, but for now that's the best I can do, I'm afraid.
All right, well, it's better than nothing. Thank you, Andrew. A minute and 20 or so seconds remaining. The order as it stands, with everybody out on track, is Hamilton, Russell, Alonso, Sainz and Piastri, who are the top 5. Everybody is out on the soft compound of tyre, except for Well, I'm getting two different readings for the two McLarens. One screen is telling me they're on the mediums, the other one's telling me they're on the softs. So we'll need to get a look at that one and see exactly what they're on. I think they're on the softs. So we'll get a closer look at that in these final closing stages. But I think, given what we think we've gathered from pre-season testing, it will be another year where Red Bull have the advantage. It will be who behind them can close up, because actually, for fear of talking exactly the same conversations that we had last year, the teams behind Red Bull in that battle for second place could, in the constructors certainly, and that final podium spot, could get very, very interesting, because that midfield scramble is tight. There isn't really a backmarker team anymore, where, you know, you go back to when you had Caterham and Marussia and HRT struggling to qualify in the 107%. No, we do have 10 competitive race teams.
Well, yes. I mean, if you speak to the ones at the back, they all say they're not competitive because they'll want to be at the front. What class is competitive? Racing and challenging for race wins and for podiums. That's what I would say classes of competitive. As the checkered flag has fallen on the final session of the day, and it's Lewis Hamilton in his Mercedes, 2/10 clear of his teammate George Russell. And the sound you can hear now is riding on board with Lewis Hamilton, who's not going to improve his time at all. He's just doing a very mediocre cruise round to end off the session.
Yeah, he is indeed, and he is fastest with a 1:33.74 in front of his teammate Russell. Fernando Alonso third, Carlos Sainz fourth, Oscar Piastri the top 5. Then it's Verstappen, Hülkenberg, Stroll, Leclerc, Perez the top 10, Albon, Ricciardo, Sargent, Magnussen, Tsunoda the top 15, Gasly, Bottas, Ocon, Zhou and Lando Norris in the McLaren 20th and last.
Thank you, Harry. It can't be, can it? Is this the Mercedes resurgence that they've been looking for, with Lewis Hamilton topping the session ahead of his teammate? No, we don't read into FP2, do we? No, I thought we did.
I thought so as well. But
I'm still going to wait.
Qualifying Qualifying will be the definitive story. So that'll be the one under the lights tomorrow evening. We should reiterate that everything's a day ahead. Qualifying, the story continues. We'll have to wait a bit longer.
So P6 for Verstappen and P10 for Sergio Perez. Of course, Red Bull supposedly the team to beat. But Alice, what is it? Is it fuel loads? Is it different run programs? Are they confident and they're trying out different things? Or is it really what we see on the timesheets now?
Well, your guess is as good as mine. We've got no idea.
No, you're the professional.
There could be running fuel loads. I mean, I would expect the teams would have done a proper qualifying simulation on the exact fuel load or the similar fuel load that they would be using, unless, for example, and I'm going to use Max as an example, let's say Max feels pretty comfortable and confident with his car. They say, well, Max, should we not show our true pace and just run slightly higher fuel load if you're confident, you're happy with the car? Max will probably say, yeah, why not? So if they're feeling that confident with the car and how it's handling, then they might be like, yeah, well, we're not going to show all our cards just yet. We'll run a heavy fuel load, and we'll let the others think that, wow, and us think, wow, maybe we will have an exciting year of racing with how we've got their Mercedes, Aston Martin, we've got Carlos Sainz in 3/10 off, and Piastri up there only 4/10 off. Maybe they're just teasing us a little bit, and they might rip it all away from us tomorrow in qualifying.
Well, I hope they don't, because this is giving us something to get pumped up about for the 2024 season. Lewis Hamilton, of course, will move to Ferrari for 2025, but Harry, this would be the most romantic end to his tenure at Mercedes. Of course, he's been with them for so long. Imagine if he sealed his championship with them, the 8th that he's obviously been trying to get back.
Oh, and it would be the fairy tale, because they feel, the injustice that was done to them, to lose that title, to do it with the team again, to reclaim it before he bids farewell into the sunshine of Italy and Fiorano. But look, there's still a sort of cloud that's hanging over with which feels like it's going to be Red Bull who turn up the wick to dial 11 come qualifying day. But look, if it's like this, then we're in for a cracker of a season.
We really are, and of course it was this time last year, wasn't it, with Fernando Alonso, with the Aston Martin, incredible car development they'd had over the winter break. They were the ones stealing the headlines, but it feels like Mercedes are going to be arguing for that and trying to get a bit of the headlines this weekend as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's a lot of intrigue as well on the Mercedes design this year as well, particularly around their front wing with some quite innovative new designs, which I think a lot of teams are looking very, very closely at to see what they're doing and if it is indeed within the rules, which nothing has been a subject on that at the moment. But I think they might be taking a little closer look when they see the end of the results page, and it's Hamilton and Russell sitting pretty at the top. Of course, Russell behind Hamilton for the time being.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we'll keep you up to date with all of that. We will be here again for practice 3, FP3 at 12:30 and quali at 4 tomorrow. Join us then.